to the great conservative movement of America and of our time. A brush fire of freedom is being lit all over this country. We, as an irate, tireless American populace, will overcome a few radical leftists that control the levers of power today. Joe Biden's failed economic policies has given us inflation like you can't believe, and the border is in disarray.
It's amazing how few of the people commenting on this have actually bothered to go see what's happening. Well, Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona actually went to the border.
Biggs, where's Andy? Boy, oh boy, Andy. There's a guy. He's tough.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of our semi-regular podcast, What's the Biggs Idea? My name is Andy Biggs. I'm the congressman from Arizona's 5th Congressional District, and I welcome you to this edition. I don't have any great guests with me this time. I just want to talk about several items that have been going on that I thought would be important for me to comment on and to try to inform folks on. And so we're going to discuss today the Bidens, the budget, and the border, but I'm going to do it in the reverse order. I'm going to start with the border just for a moment, a few minutes anyway. So we recently had Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas testify to the Judiciary Committee. In that committee hearing, many of us asked similar type questions. I mean, do you think the border's open or closed? And my line of questioning was, I wanted to know who he blamed for the border being open or for any of the problems that were happening at the border, whether he would take the blame or whether he would lay it at the feet of President Biden. Well, first of all, he does not believe the border is open, even though you still had about 140 to 150,000 apprehensions last month, which makes the total of every month that Joe Biden has been in office, you've had over 100,000 apprehensions. That's the longest string of that in history. You've had many months over 200,000, and the highest month was almost 260,000. That's just apprehensions. That doesn't include the gotaways. What's dangerous about the gotaways is they get into the country. We don't know who they are, but we know some of them are getting in, and we track them as they're coming in, but we lose track of them, and then others are unknown. So it's almost impossible to tell how many people have gotten in, although estimates vary from 1.5 to 2.5 million gotaways over the 2 years or so that President Biden has been the president. So that's why we had Mayorkas there. That's why I was asking the questions, Secretary Mayorkas, do you take blame for this, or is this the policies of the Biden administration? He consistently refused to answer those questions. He didn't want to get into that, didn't want to talk about that. So I was down at the border just the other day. So I'll just tell you how the schedule kind of went. We got out of our legislative session for the what's called the August recess, August work period, whatever you want to call it. And so I came back, and on, I want to say I came back Thursday or Friday, probably Friday. I think it's Friday night that we got in. Anyway, so Sunday I flew back to D.C. because Devon Archer, the former business partner of Hunter Biden, gave his deposition. So attending the deposition for the House Republicans for the Oversight Committee were myself and Congressman Jim Jordan. And we were the only Republican members there. And the only Democrat member there was Dan Goldman. And today that transcript was released. So I'll talk about that event. So I flew directly from that deposition. Once it was over, I flew and got into San Antonio in the middle of the night, and then got up early the next morning and drove down to a place called Eagle Pass, Texas. Eagle Pass has a couple of bridges that go into Mexico, and Piedras Negras is the name of the Mexican side. And so we got to go around and we toured that with a DPS, a Texas DPS officer. Much of that area is being patrolled and controlled by Texas Department of Public Safety. So we went, and he informed us that of course, we were there in daytime hours, and it's really hot, and so you don't get much foot traffic when it's really hot, at least not in that area. Most of their traffic comes after the sun goes down. And the previous night, they had interdicted or encountered more than 900 individuals in Eagle Pass alone. That isn't the entire sector, I don't believe, but that because it's in the Del Rio sector, but that over 900. That same the day previous to that, they had over 600. That same day, the Rio Grande Valley had, I think it was like 2,133, and Tucson sector was 2,112. So just in those three areas of the country, over about a 2-day period, you were getting 4,000 or 5,000 people from there. So Secretary Mayorkas told us that the border is secure and controlled. What was interesting about that is there's a statutory definition of securing and controlling the border. That's in the Secure Fence Act of 2006. And Secretary Mayorkas was reminded that there is a statutory definition, and he said, well, we don't think anybody can meet that statutory definition, so we just kind of created our own definition. And by our own definition, we're good. We've got it closed. So that's important to understand about Secretary Mayorkas. Now, what happened in the Tucson sector? Sector Chief Modlin sent out a tweet today about how many people came in, and right now people are coming in Lukeville. Now, Lukeville isn't technically in the Tucson sector. That's over in the Yuma sector, but because it's in the it's an Organ Pipe National Monument. They had a group of 530 people come in last night through Lukeville, and Lukeville is actually really very busy and very active right now. And here's what you need to understand about Lukeville: it's very remote. There's very few staging areas that you would normally see before people are crossing and entering the country illegally between a port of entry. So they're coming through Lukeville pretty significantly. Last week, they had over 9,000 people come through the Tucson sector just last week alone. That when I say 9,000, I'm talking about, again, encounters, and also over the weekend, not this last weekend, the weekend before last, they had 3,500 come in on the weekend. So we continue to see this going over and over and over again. So I was down there and going through Eagle Pass, looking at it. This is the place where, in a portion of it, they have a set of buoys in the middle of the river. The river is so shallow that you can actually just walk across the river. And the idea, of course, is to funnel them to certain places and dissuade people not to cross the border, across the river. It's very dangerous to cross the Rio Grande River. Now, all of that's going on, and the stories seem almost would leave you incredulous, but the reality is that is what's happening. While in Eagle Pass, I had a chance to meet with other prominent federal officials and talk to them. Got to look through federal court dockets and some of the cases that are going on there with regard to human trafficking, with regard to drug smuggling that's taking place. And we were given, by one briefing, we were told that there had been 5,000 human trafficking cases that I think are being prosecuted under Texas state law as opposed to federal law. That's the way I understood that. So back to the Arizona border is also experiencing traffic. Like I say, almost daily. The Tucson sector is either number 1 or 2 every day in the crossings, and the human trafficking is bad. But so I met with ICE officials this morning, to get their take on things. They're stretched to the limit as well. There are times, quite frankly, that they don't have any ability to actually enforce the law because they're having to go down to support Border Patrol. And when they do that, they get moved off of the law enforcement functions, and they move into functions of caregiving to the thousands upon thousands of people who are coming across the border illegally. Secretary Mayorkas champions the CBP One app. The CBP One app, he calls it a way to get lawfully into the country, but there's nothing lawful about the CBP One app, as a recent court has indicated. The problem with the CBP One app is you're not taking the information that's necessary. There is no vetting, and they're letting people go into the country. So we're still in the catch and release mode. And that's what's going on. I thought I would just give you an update briefly on the border. I also met with local law enforcement officials today in the Southeast Valley, the Phoenix metro area. And one of the big concerns that they have is one of the communities is having a lot of human trafficking coming through their community, but all of the communities are having massive amounts of fentanyl come through, going through high schools, and it's a very dangerous situation. Regular overdoses, some deaths are occurring due to fentanyl poisoning, and this is a problem that persists not just in Arizona but throughout the entire country. I've talked to law enforcement from other places around the country as well, trying to get a feel for that. This is something that we have got to bring under control, and you bring it under control by bringing your border under control. So that's really kind of give you a summation of what's going on the border. The budget. So I want to talk about the budget for just a second. So I'm just doing it actually in the inverse of what we said in the beginning. We said Biden, budget, and border. I've gone border. Now I'm going to go to budget. So the simplest way to put it is, and then I'll break it down just a little bit more, but without getting into too much of the weeds. The simplest way to look at it is President Biden's administration requested a spend for fiscal year 24, which begins on October 1st, of $6.9 trillion. That would be an increase of about $700 billion. $6.9 trillion. The package that Republicans in the House are talking about is a $6.8 trillion spend. And then there are others that seek a $6.7 trillion spend. Now, what does that mean? Well, and then I'm asking for a $5 trillion spend, so I'm not getting any support for that. So I get it. They don't want to get down there. The revenue is $5 trillion. So whether it's Biden, Republicans in Congress, whether it's the more conservative-leaning Republicans in Congress, they're all going to have a shortfall of $1.7 to $1.9 trillion over our projected revenue. And that's assuming we don't run into any kind of recessionary cycle in the economy. So you're looking at this massive amount of deficit. And so that means that we're going to borrow effectively everything that we're spending on what's called discretionary military and non-military spending, which is total about $1.8 trillion. That's what it'll look like. We will borrow every penny of that. That's what's going on with the budget. So that gives you an idea of the numbers. Let's talk process for a second. The House passed one budget bill out that had a lot of good things in it, which didn't do what I wanted it to do necessarily, but it had a lot of good things in it. That was the National Defense Authorization Act, and I voted for that, and that passed out the week before we went into this recess period, the last week of July. What happens next is there's 11 more bills in the budget process that are going to be considered and voted on before the end of September. Then they get to the Senate. I don't think the Senate has time to deal with those things, but if the Senate's working on their own budget, but In any event, it gets to what we call the conference committee. You have people from the House, people from the Senate. They get together, they talk and debate and argue back and forth. And then they may not like what they do, but they're going to come up against the deadline of September 30th, and they will then do what's called a continuing resolution. I'm predicting this, that they'll do a continuing resolution. They might get a couple of those bills out and in a what we call a minibus, so they take 2 or 3 of them, combine them together, and then they'll do a continuing resolution. Continuing resolution probably will go sometime in December, and then they'll come back in. They'll do a massive spending package called an omnibus in December. Now, why do I tell you that? I'm just projecting what I think might happen. I'm predicting. But we have major budget problems. We spend far more than we bring in. And until we get that under control, we've got a problem. I've reintroduced legislation that indicates that historically, and when I say historically, I mean as recently as the Biden administration, both I don't mean Biden, I mean the Obama administration, both parties believe that the number one national security threat was our deficit spending and our national debt. So for those of you who blame me and say, well, you voted for Trump to expand, that's not accurate. I voted for one budget bill that actually moved towards balancing the budget during the Trump administration, and it did not make it through the finish line on the Senate side. I voted against every other budget or big spending bill. Why? We don't have the money, and it is a national security threat. So that's just kind of a backgrounder on what's happening with the budget. I wanted you to know that. So where was I? I flew in to attend the Devon Archer deposition this past Monday. The transcript is already out, which I'm very pleased it's out. I anticipated that it would take 2 or 3 weeks because they usually do, but it's totally out. And I commend Chairman Jamie Comer from Kentucky, who's chairman of the Oversight Committee, for authorizing that release immediately, because I think it is so very important. So I want to talk about some of the things we heard there that I think are really important to understand. And first of all, the first one was the Biden brand. So Mr. Archer and Hunter Biden were business partners for a good number of years, but they weren't the only partners. There are other partners. There are times that they had as many as 8 other business partners that came and go. And everybody but Hunter Biden has been indicted and gone to prison. The only one that didn't, of those, the people that were working with Hunter Biden, that did not get indicted or go to prison, is Hunter Biden. Now, if you love Hunter Biden, you're saying, well, see, that means he didn't do anything wrong. If you're a little bit more cynical, like I am, and you're trying to look at it, you say, why is it that he's the only guy that was never charged and never went to prison? So let's talk about it. We got this thing here. One of the questions I asked was, did you and your partners design or intend to use political influence to raise capital and build a financial conglomerate? And his response was not directly on point, as you might guess. He sat there with his attorney, and so the attorney kind of could put the kibosh on some of the things when he might otherwise answer directly. So he didn't answer that one directly, and I asked several other questions along those same lines because of other court filings that I had read from some of these other people, where they had to actually tell the truth because they were trying to get leniency, and they knew that the truth was going to come out. So what did Devon tell us? He told us initially that part of their business model was to use the Biden brand. The Biden brand. Now, what did he mean by the Biden brand? And I asked him, I went back 3 different times asking questions related to this. But I pointed out, I said, you're not talking about Dr. Jill, And you're not talking about Brother Jim. You are talking about the one Biden member of the family that had influence and stroke and had power and had notoriety. And that was not Hunter Biden, but Joe Biden. And he basically said, yeah. So Joe Biden was the Hunter brand. Joe Biden was the Hunter brand. And so what were they doing? We were required to focus this on, I won't get into the reasons why, but we had to focus on Burisma and the Ukrainian issues. So as we were going through Burisma and the Ukrainian issues, what was Burisma getting and why did they put Hunter Biden and Devon Archer on the board of directors? They were getting two things. Number one, they were getting access to Joe Biden. And I'll cover that in a second. And the second thing they were getting is protection. And that's really what Devon Archer said. He didn't say it in those exact words, but what he did say was this. He said, number one, Burisma would have gone out of business much sooner if the Biden brand had not been involved with Burisma. What was the Biden brand? Joe Biden. So they would have gone under much sooner. So what were they getting out of that? They were selling Joe Biden as essentially a governmental partner, or the way that they would interpret it in Ukraine. Second thing he said this. He said, because of the Biden brand, people knew that they couldn't legally mess with Burisma. Right? You understand that? So you have protection. You can't mess legally with Burisma, and you have access, which is why they were able to stay in business as long as they did. So what happens? There's a meeting in Dubai of the board of directors. After the board of directors meeting, Hunter goes over to the Four Seasons Hotel where the manager is a friend of his. Who follows? Devon Archer, the treasurer / secretary of the board of directors, and the CEO of Burisma. So they all go over there, and they're out there. Hunter Devon describes it. He says, "We're out on the deck, we're drinking, we're having drinks, we're talking, and it comes up that Burisma is feeling a lot of pressure and heat. They need someone to take the heat off. Who are they getting pressure and heat from? Viktor Shokin, the general prosecutor in Ukraine, is investigating Burisma for corruption, and they're getting heat. And so the CEO says, we need you to make a call. And initially, Devon Archer testifies that on that call was Joe Biden. Hunter called Joe Biden. His attorney stepped in and said, wait a second. You mean to say the DC team? Oh, yeah. Yeah, Devon says, oh, yeah, the DC team. I think his first answer was more accurate. But it doesn't matter because what happened next indicates the level of play that Joe Biden had. They make the phone call. Devon Archer said that they excused themselves. They went off. He said he felt like he was black boxed on some of this stuff. So they go and they make the call to the DC team, Joe Biden, and tell him what's up. We're getting pressure. Well, here comes Joe Biden 5 days later. They've already had a plan for him to come to Ukraine. They had been putting pressure on, trying to get something done with regard to Viktor Shokin for quite some time. Joe Biden comes. He's got $1 billion of foreign aid to give to Ukraine, approved by the taxpayers. He tells the Ukrainian president, he says, you're not going to get this $1 billion unless you fire Viktor Shokin. Result, within 6 hours, Viktor Shokin is fired. And the investigation is stopped. Burisma is never investigated. Now, I know a lot of people that are apologists for Hunter will say, oh, it's just coincidence and things would have been better if they kept Viktor Shokin. There is no evidence to that. The evidence all says the other thing. So they sold access. The other night, Devon Archer said that what they were selling was an abuse of soft power. An abuse of soft power. What did he mean by that? What he meant was they were using Joe Biden, and Joe Biden was delivering. And mind you, we're only talking Ukraine. We haven't talked about China. We haven't talked about Kazakhstan, which, by the way, still has all the documents. We haven't talked about Romania. We haven't talked about the other Mideastern nations involved, nor have we talked about the widow of the former mayor of Moscow, who gave $40 million of investment and as much as $180 million, depending on the evidence that you look at, to one of these companies of Hunter Biden and Devon Archer. Of that, $3.5 million was immediately sidetracked through wire to the accounts of Devon and Hunter. So what do you have? I think you have a string that takes you right into the former vice president when he was vice president. All this took place while he was vice president of the United States. And it implicates him to his eye teeth. And that's why I say we have to open up an impeachment inquiry immediately. There's more that came in that transcript. I encourage you to grab hold of that transcript, take a look at it. I'm pushing to get a few more people in that I believe will actually finish that line right into Joe Biden. We have more bank documents to look at. We've received more than 170 suspicious activity reports about Hunter Biden. And the one thing that I also stood out, and this will be the last point because it's just 2 points with Devon Archer, because they were almost throwaways. One of them, he mentions that the former CEO is now in hiding in Cyprus. Who's he in hiding from? He didn't go into that. The second thing is there are so many business entities, LLCs, so many bank accounts set up that Devon Archer was having trouble keeping them straight throughout his testimony. That tells you a whole lot about what went on. So we're basically out of time, but I wanted to give you an update, even though I didn't have a guest with me today, and I usually like to have those guests, but I wanted to talk about the border, I wanted to talk about budget, and I wanted to talk about Biden. All three of those are causing us to be in the United States of America today at an existential crossroads. We are at an inflection point. And the last point before I sign off, and thank you all for watching and listening today, is it is no coincidence that the day after Devon Archer gave his deposition, that Donald Trump was indicted on 4 more charges. No coincidence in my mind at all. Thanks for watching me. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on the next edition of What's the Big's Idea. And God bless you all. And we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.